I think he's going to bring this home.
Interesting. Harry, thanks very much for that.
Thank you.
Great to see you. We'll continue to monitor everything that is happening in Hanoi, Vietnam tonight and keep these live images on the screen. The President's Summit is meant to avert a possible war on the Korean Peninsula. But on the other side of the planet, war is looking more likely by the day. In Venezuela, the socialist government of Nicolas Maduro is falling apart, and more voices in the U.S. suggest it is our duty to launch a military intervention to overthrow him. Consequences be damned. David Tafuri is an international lawyer and former advisor to Barack Obama's presidential campaigns. He joins us tonight. David, thanks very much for coming on.
Thanks for
so
having
let
me.
me ask you the question of Venezuela that I've asked you of Syria and of Yemen and of Libya and of Iraq. How is it in America's interest directly to effect regime change, to overthrow the government of Nicolas Maduro?
Well, I don't agree with you that many people in Washington are calling for the U.S. to intervene right now. It is, but the U.S. does.
I don't know where you are right now. Come back to Washington. You can hear
I'm in New York. I just left Washington yesterday. But I do think that this administration would like to see regime change, and through sanctions and other sort of soft power techniques is pushing for regime change, and I think that's appropriate. The problem in Venezuela is a completely failed state. It has an authoritarian dictator who's plunged the country into complete desperation, and that's creating a very negative humanitarian situation. It's creating refugees who are fanning out all over South America, Latin America. Some of them are going to come here to the U.S. More refugees have applied for asylum in the U.S. than from any other country this year. It's a problem for America, and it's a problem for this hemisphere. It's also a human rights problem. Several people have been killed at the border just because other countries are trying to bring in food aid. So this is something the U.S. has to be concerned about. Anytime a country completely becomes a failed state, it's a place where drugs can come through. It's a place that can support terrorism.
You don't need to convince
Those are all
me.
things we should worry about.
I've watched as the left, the neocons, Bill Kristol and friends, Barack Obama, Samantha Power, Hillary Clinton toppled dictator, and George W. Bush, for that matter, toppled dictator after dictator, leaving smoking craters in their wake, failed states that have made the world worse. So I completely agree with you 100% in what you just said. But why wouldn't our overriding concern be a wave of refugees coming across our border? Pretty much the last thing we need in a country with as many problems as we have. Why shouldn't that be job number one, prevent a wave of refugees from coming to our country?
Well, I agree with you, but regime change would probably lessen the amount of refugees. Already, as I mentioned, there are tons of refugees coming out of Maduro's Venezuela. That's a big problem, and it's only going to get worse until Maduro's gone. None of the economic, policies that he's put in place have helped. They've made it worse. There's huge inflation. The economy is dying, and so he has to go. He's no longer a legitimate leader. That's why President Trump recognized the opposition leader as the legitimate leader of Venezuela.
He's appalling, and as was Chavez before him. And it's a shame that so many on the American left have supported the members of the Kennedy family. Bernie Sanders. I mean, I'm not going to defend Maduro. Why would I? I am standing back in shock as John Bolton, the national security advisor, encourages, various countries to offer asylum to refugees, as Republicans in the House suggest giving refugee status to Venezuelan refugees. Why should the United States bear the burden of socialism in Venezuela? I'm completely confused.
Well, it's not the burden of socialism. It's the effort to prevent a failed state, because a failed state is going to hurt us. When you talk about doing an intervention,
but I'm asking you. I'm sorry, maybe it wasn't clear. Okay. Why are people in the United States agitating for us to bring in refugees from Venezuela? Why should we have to pay the price for the insane socialist policies of Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro? I don't understand.
Well, America has a history of bringing in refugees. We shouldn't always have to shoulder the burden. It should be countries all over the world. Refugees should be accepted all over the world. There's lots of reasons why you need to have refugees to be able to go somewhere else. I mean, it's a humanitarian reason. You also want to support, but let me just finish. You want to support that. You want to support political dissidents who are pushing for a country to become a democratic country, to become a pro-Western, pro-American country. So when those dissidents end up having their lives threatened because they talk positively about America, because they cooperated with America, and they have to leave, they're running for their lives, they need somewhere to go. That's how we encourage them.
Okay, but
that's how we encourage them to support our policies.
Are we still pretending that democracy? Look, I despise the Venezuelan government. I think they're evil. Okay, so I just want to be clear.
We agree on that.
But why are we pretending that the goal for every country around the world should be democracy? Do we want it in Jordan? Do we want it in Saudi Arabia? I mean, that is like a 2003 talking point that has turned out to be ridiculous. We don't want democracy in every country around the world. That shouldn't be the goal. What are you talking about?
It's been a bipartisan policy.
I know, that's the problem.
Both the Republicans and the Democrats to spread democracy. I mean, that goes all the way back. Because that goes all the way back to our founding fathers, Tucker. I mean, they supported.
No, the founding fathers were not neocons.
They said people should be able to decide. People should be able to decide who their leaders are.
Yeah,
they should be able to vote for their leaders. They should have freedom of speech, freedom of association, freedom of press. Those are things that Venezuela does not have. Okay, so we should support that.
Okay, but hold on. Why are we pretending that democracy is a panacea? We know from the experience in Iraq, where we topple the dictator and impose a democracy on the population, that it did not work at all. And the main effect, according to the new report from the Army War College, was to make Iran more powerful. So, like, the democracy talking point, don't you think it ought to go to, I'm just pulling this out of the air, the dustbin of history at this point? Or no?
It's like someone said, democracy is the worst form of government except for every other one. Democracy is imperfect,
really?
But it supports individual rights. It supports our values. And right now, we're basically in a competition with China and Russia, who have a very different vision for the world. They are not democratic countries. They don't believe in democracy. They believe in their form of kleptocracy and authoritarianism.
Let me just ask you one last
and they want to spread that.
Right,
so we're countering with democracy.
We're fighting Russia again. Okay,
and
right.
If democracies fall and they become, if democracies fall and become authoritarian countries, that ultimately will threaten us. We are in a community of democracies.
I'm sorry, George W. Bush. That's been proved not true. Really quick, would you like Jordan to become a democracy? It's a dictatorship now. It's run literally by a king. Okay, it's a police state. Do we want to have free and fair elections in Jordan tomorrow? Who would that be good for? Well, let's see, nobody.
Eventually, all of these countries are moving towards democracy. Even a place like Jordan is becoming more democratic.
Let's hope not. I hope not. I'm on the king's side there. I'm sorry.